Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rushing the Field, National College Football Show from NBC Sports. I'm Nicole Auerbach. He's Joshua Perry, and we're going to go to school today, I think, Joshua. I think we're going to learn something about the revenue share era of college sports, which actually starts today as we're recording this, July 1, 2025. Athletes can get paid from their schools directly. So I feel like I've talked to a lot of people involved in the nuts and bolts in this. I've talked to so many lawyers over the years. I know you have as well. So I feel like we're just going to try to educate ourselves and our listeners about something that is actually quite complicated.
It is very complicated. I think that like the lay college football fan, like somebody who enjoys the sport but maybe doesn't follow the day-to-day headlines, is like, okay, what exactly is all of this? What does this mean? And does it ultimately affect what I'm getting ready to see on Saturdays during the fall? So feels like a great time to do this. You've got a lot of information. I've got some information and some good questions here. So looking forward to this one.
Yeah, so there is an explainer that will be up on NBCsports.com by the time you're listening to this, where I tried to explain this all in plain English. Tried to talk to a lot of athletic directors who are in charge of implementing all of the changes. But basically, this comes out of the House settlement, this is another thing that I've realized. If you're a college football fan, you may not know what this is. We've been talking about it so much, Joshua, because it's the off season, and this and college football playoff expansion are kind of the main two topics. But I think a lot of people kind of tuned out, and we'll start there. So the House settlement is actually 3 lawsuits that were combined and settled. So there were lawsuits against the NCAA and the Power 5 at that time, because the Pac-12 Power Conference. And basically, it's athletes from 2016 through 2021 who were not able to be paid for their name, image, and likeness. They could not do NIL deals, saying, hey, what about us? We want some back pay damages. Just missed Joshua Perry, actually, with this 2016 cutout, statute of limitations. But that's really where this starts. So there's the back payments to the athletes who played college sports before NIL became legal. And there's the second part of this settlement, which is the revenue sharing era, right? This is like the go forward piece of this. And that's what we're really going to focus on today. We're going to try to explain it. But essentially, Joshua, we're talking about schools signing deals with their own athletes, paying them to essentially use their NIL rights, right? To market them, to have them, maybe they're going to do, ads for the school. Maybe they're going to be on tickets, little images of their tickets or a calendar. But that's what we're talking about. It's not technically paying them to play sports, but that's what we're doing, right? The schools are paying the athletes who are playing sports and making money from their schools. And this is because, listen, these schools are making millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars off these athletes. So now they're going to share the revenue. And for this year, they're going to be able to share up to $20.5 million for all of their athletes total. So that's the cap for everyone.
Okay, so it's an interesting thing. And we've talked about this difference between name, image, and likeness, and actually like the pay for play aspect of it. And I think we should talk about that a little bit further down the road. But as you look at this settlement and now having the revenue share, a couple of things that stand out to me, and maybe you can go into a little bit more depth here. But number one, how did they come up with the quote unquote cap number for this year, and how are they going to calculate that moving forward? And then number two, you mentioned the former Power 5, Power 4, whatever you want to call it. Schools are able to opt into this, opt out of this. They can set their cap numbers. So talk about that a little bit too.
Okay, so the named defendants have to do the settlement. So everyone, the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and Big 12 is locked in. But then everyone else could opt in. So, I mean, you saw a lot of like the Group of 5 schools like make a big production about being like, hey, we're opting in, because what it does, it's up to $20.5 million, right? So, not all these schools are going to be able to afford that, but it puts them in the same set of rules as everybody else. And that even if you do it at a smaller level, you're still able to do that direct payment from a school. And you're still going to kind of, again, just operate under the same rules as everybody else. So this has been actually a very interesting conversation and question around like lower levels of Division I, around basketball only leagues. And so that's something to just kind of monitor, because some leagues are giving everyone a grace period of like, well, half our league is opting in this year, half is opting out, but next year we need to kind of like, we need to standardize this so everyone's kind of on an even playing field in our own league. But for our purposes, for like the major college football brands, they're all doing it. Again, they may not all be doing $20.5 million, but that is the cap. And we'll get to this a little bit later because this is something that lawyers think will be challenged, that there is a cap at all, right? Because originally the cap was 0. Schools cannot pay their athletes. That's a problem, right? That's an antitrust violation. So there are concerns about capping it at all. But to your question of how it was calculated, it's actually really interesting. So they added up basically everyone's revenue, the power, we'll go with Power 4 because, again, no offense to the Pac-12, but like those schools are now in the other conferences. So we'll just refer to it as like the power conferences. Their revenue that they bring in. So ticket sales, media rights deals, that type of revenue. Like when you think of an athletic department, the money they bring in, that's what we're talking about. And then they added Notre Dame in there. They divided it up by all of those schools. So it's the average Power 4 revenue, and it's 22% of that. So almost a quarter of the average revenue, and that's what they're going to share. Again, this was calculated and decided without collective bargaining, without really the athlete input, right? You had the lawyers who were representing the class action decide this, but that's another reason why like this could be challenged moving forward. But it's essentially 22% of the average power department, Power 5, Power 4 athletic department revenue. It'll change. They'll calculate it every 3 years because things change in college sports. But in between, it'll just go up 4% each year to address inflation. So it's going to increase. Right now, it's at $20.5 million. It's going to go up over the course of the decade.
No, that's it's really good stuff there. It's going to be intriguing too, I think, with the landscape moving forward. And we've seen kind of the arms race that's happened in the sport, but there's also a little bit of a separation even within the power conferences. So what that number will look like when they go to reevaluate it here in a few years intrigues me. But then it leaves this question, right? We've got the cap now, and we know what that number is, what they can go up to, $20.5 million.
For all sports, by the way.
Yes, and this
Not
includes everybody. And we'll get into how some athletic departments want to prioritize their money. Some are going football heavy. Others understand that their history is rich with Olympic sports and they have to honor that. But what about the rest of the NIL? I was watching guys getting these huge checks from these collectives. Where do the collectives go?
Yeah, it's a great question. Collectives are not trying to go away. Like some of those people have been absorbed into athletic departments, right? If you're trying to make deals, make introductions, there could be a valuable skill set there. But for the most part, like we have seen people who got a taste of power and influence and part of the process try to maintain that, right? So I think that there are going to still be collectives. The hope when you talk to athletic directors is that collectives become far less important and influential. Because again, if schools can pay athletes directly, it simplifies everything. Like it's not, you don't need the middleman in that system. And you don't need that input of like, okay, well, the coach wants this person to be, the starting cornerback, but the collective's offering that guy more money. What do we do? Right. You don't run into some of those dynamics. But well, let's back up a few months because this is kind of like a collective's last hurrah, if you will.
Yes.
Again, they're not going away completely, but there have been some insane deals for this coming season. From January until the settlement got approved in mid-June, we saw so many basketball players when the portal was open for basketball.
The hoops deals were crazy.
Those basketball deals were absolutely insane. They were like in the range of what first-round draft picks get paid, right? By the way. And then football, everyone was front-loading these deals. And we actually got some information from the University of Missouri because the local paper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, FOIA'd for records. So they found that not only was there $24 million spent on NIL this year, there was $10.3 million spent in June alone leading up into the settlement because everyone was operating under the assumption that the new NIL clearinghouse is going to take effect when the settlement got approved. So before that, no one's going to be, kind of getting out the magnifying glass and looking at these deals super closely to see, hey, is this kind of fair market value? Is this similar to what another athlete endorser is paid for similar work? What is the exchange of goods and services, right? Like, all the things that mark a real deal. So you saw a lot of money getting thrown around, and basically the deals for this year getting paid up front so that they're not subject to that scrutiny, which means, Joshua, that I think very logically the next step is that a lot of these players are probably going to make less money next year with what they're getting paid directly from the school, from the rev share, and NIL deals that go through the clearinghouse. Probably going to be a little bit of a market correction next year.
Right. So deals that go through the clearinghouse, it's anything over $600. And like, that's what most of these deals were,
yeah.
to try to get these athletes to basically play at a certain school. So the thing that folks that I've talked to have said is there either has to be a reduction in the value of the deals or an increase in the whatever the athlete is providing. One of those things is significantly easier to achieve than the other. It's easier to say we're going to give you less money because we can't ask you to do a podcast episode every single day to make this deal make sense. So certainly there is a market correction that is coming. I'm curious to see how that actually plays out, because we know that there are people that are actively looking right now to try to get around that. And then you mentioned the kind of how the collectives are morphing. Companies like Learfield are now essentially going to act in the way that the collectives did, but everything's just more formalized now. Like, this is a legitimate company that is used to selling packages regarding, media and rights and advertising. That's what they're going to do in conjunction with these universities on behalf of student athletes. It's just not some guy who's going out raising random funds and then giving it to a player.
Right. So for those who don't know what a company like Learfield or PlayFi do, like, they have the multimedia rights for the school. So that's where, like, they can go out and sell a deal. Like, if Joshua were still a student athlete and Joshua is allergic to everything, he could go do a deal with like EpiPen, right? And they could be like, oh, this is a great pairing because, like, this is something he uses in his daily life, and he would be like a genuine endorser for it. But they could go to EpiPen and say, hey, we have an athlete at Ohio State and here's his story, et cetera. And then if that deal works, they know you can wear Ohio State gear. You can use the trademarks and the logos and all of those things, which make it a more valuable deal. So that's where it comes in. That's a nice piece of this. Like, you're already in bed. You got a deal and a partnership with the universities. So yeah, they walked me through a lot of examples of deals that they do and they help facilitate. And listen, I know we think a lot about collectives, and we'll get back to them in a second, but we also think about like a Caitlin Clark State Farm deal. That's like a massive deal, right? Like, that's a lot of money. There could be smaller deals, like the Joshua EpiPen example would be one. They walked me through an example with a Michigan gymnast who loves chocolate milk. The Michigan Dairy Association wanted to partner with an athlete. It's a perfect pairing, right? Because it's a genuine interest. Someone who really loves Chipotle, look for a deal. Jeremiah Smith, does he want to do a deal with Chipotle, right? Like, there are stuff that make a lot of sense. There's storytelling that you can do if you partner with like, a hospital system and talk about organ donation. So there's a lot of deals like that. And when we think about Olympic sport athletes, especially female athletes, because there's a lot of deals and opportunities for them that we just don't hear about. Those are what those deals look like. And so you have a partner within the athletic department that can make those introductions. Now, the question is going to be, you've mentioned this about people trying to like kind of skirt the rules, right? Like, people are going to try to use NIL deals, maybe with collectives, maybe just with business peoples and boosters associated with schools, to help like get above that cap, right? Like, that's, as soon as they set that cap at 20.5 million, first of all, it went, oh my God, that's so much money. How are we going to, like, that's a new line item in our athletic department. How are we going to, make cuts or fundraise to cover that? The second piece was, oh, but what if we need to go above that, right? So Joshua, I mean, you talk to people, like, how confident are they that like this is actually going to be enforced, that these are going to be real deals that are like a reasonable range of compensation, that there are actual services provided that make sense? Or if a deal gets denied, are people still going to pay them anyway? And you're just going to have some of that under the table boosters paying athletes that used to exist in college sports and kind of went away because it's all been above board.
So I think that I think there are a lot of people who are trying to figure out where exactly that line is going to be. Folks I've talked to, They're basically like, submit some deals and then see what it comes back like. I think the other thing that is important here is the more deals that are submitted, the more accurate the number can be on what a deal would be worth. And so I think that there might be some schools that just start submitting a whole bunch of deals just so the clearinghouse can see, like, this is actually what people are willing to pay out to our athletes, et cetera, et cetera. I also think there's this prevailing idea that the bag man might return, that you're going to have the situation where the booster is like, hey, you know, pull up to the Baptist church on First Street and look under the pew, and there's going to be a sack of money sitting right there, and don't tell a damn soul what is going on here.
Maybe a McDonald's bag.
It could be a McDonald's bag. Who knows, right? We've seen it go
those.
down at the hospital in the past. But whatever it is, I think that if the clearinghouse becomes too obstructive to how these schools want to get deals done, they're going to find ways to get deals done.
So this is another area that people expect lawsuits.
Right.
Now, listen, the way that this system is set up, all of these schools talked about it, Power 5 schools, schools that opt into the settlement, there's a new entity that is running the new world, the new system. It's not the NCAA. So the NCAA still exists, but now they're in charge of rules like eligibility. They're running championships, but they're not in charge of NIL rules or revenue share, cap, the reporting system. All of that is now under the College Sports Commission. So it's a third party. They hired an executive from MLB who ran investigations there. He was like involved in the Astros investigation. And they also have an enforcement mechanism. They're still hiring, staffing around that. But the idea is that they would be the ones to look at, hey, if someone's trying to circumvent the cap, if deals are still happening even after they've been denied. And there's an arbitration process that is built into this. And that's the same for, again, like cap reporting and cap management. Right. And some of the other stuff that might be challenged by schools.
And schools have to sign a deal.
Yes.
Right. To basically
be part of
involved
this.
in this and say that we're going to go to arbitration and not to the court.
Correct. And they are, they're basically like saying they're not going to sue, and challenge like all of these different, rules, like we saw over and over. Anytime there's a transfer rule, anything over the last few years. And I would think that you're also not supposed to encourage your attorney general or state reps to be like, we're gonna fight this because they're supposed to be buying in. The whole idea here is you guys have been living in this unregulated, quote, wild, wild west world for 4 years. You wanted rules. Now you have to opt into the rules. You have to follow them. You have to really buy into the system. And again, these athletic directors have just been exhausted by all of this. They've been preparing for it for a year now. So they do want it to work. And I talked to Joe Castiglione at Oklahoma, Mike Babinski at Purdue, Pat Chun at Washington. They were all united in saying there's a lot of people that are not going to believe it until they see it. So if someone breaks the rules, especially with this NIL clearinghouse, they need to be punished. It needs to be quick and it needs to be serious because you have to change behavior. So if you don't want bagmen to exist, you have to make an example of someone pretty quick so that people stop doing it the way that they think. Because I actually think back to the first collective, the first not team-wide, but position group-wide deal. Remember Texas paid offensive linemen, their collective, or a group of boosters back at that time, $50,000 each.
Yep.
If the NCAA or someone had come in and said, you're not allowed to do that, that's not really their marketing value, maybe you don't get to a world with collectives. So it is really important to see what happens right out of the gate if someone does something that's against the rules of this new world.
I think a lot of people would agree with that, but there's also this but we know that it's going to get a little bit sticky. And if somebody
might actually sue, even though you're not supposed to, right? Or a player hires a lawyer and sues, right?
Yes. And so and maybe this is a little bit down the line, but if there was some way to get Congress to make a law that said that bagmen can go to jail, this would be a lot easier to enforce.
Correct. And there are still a lot of people involved in all of this that still are asking for congressional help. They're still asking either a narrow antitrust exemption or just student athletes are their own category. They're not employees. And again, just some protections around it so that they can create rules. You have a lot of people also talking about collective bargaining if you get to that down the road. Can you structure that with or without them being employees? I think you can, but who is in that bargaining unit? Like it gets complicated. It would take a little while to get there, but those are pieces that are probably important if you want to continue to avoid lawsuits, because again, someone can challenge the cap. Someone can challenge the fact that deals are getting denied because, Joshua, the argument is, you're not looking at anyone else's deals. You're not, putting YouTube, an influencer on your campus. We're not putting that deal through a clearinghouse. You're not checking that.
Right.
Pro athletes don't have their deals checked. Isn't your marketability, isn't your value whatever someone is willing to pay you? That would be the argument.
It's an interesting thing. Like the pro sports part of it, I think complicates it because, again, antitrust rules and how they can operate. But like even the NFLPA takes a look at the deals that players are doing
for endorsement deals.
They do. And
so Patrick Mahomes gets a call from Gillette, or Tom Brady gets a call from Gillette. They look at the okay. So maybe you do have a little bit of apples to apples. Okay.
No, nobody's ever getting their stuff denied, but they're looking at it. Just they want to have the information, etc. The other thing I would say, like the YouTube example, is a very intriguing one for me because I feel like that is strictly business, and companies are only paying to try to get marketing value. And so the YouTuber comes with all of their engagement numbers. This is a demographic. These are the numbers. These are how my shows do. And companies know based off of the numbers what they're willing to pay. But we're in this weird blend of like business and just people having pride for their universities, where the end game is winning a championship. And that's the return on investment. It's not a financial number that you would get back. And like,
but it's supposed to be, right? Like these are supposed to be marketing and endorsement deals.
That's my point. Like, I don't know if that's a legal argument, but the thing that I would say is it's probably necessary because there are people who are acting in this space with no end game financially. They just want to win a championship. Whereas the business who's going to the YouTuber knows that they want to get a certain number of people to buy their product, a certain number of signups for their whatever it is. And that's the biggest difference here.
Right. And so that's kind of the question of, does this become, quote, real NIL? And I know a lot of people roll their eyes at that, but that's what ADs and coaches and people who work in the space talk about. Like those are real endorsements. Right. Someone who has power and influence to endorse a product and get people to buy it. Right. And so that's where this is going to be really interesting because those are the deals that they want this to move towards. And I think schools are going to be trying to position their athletes to make introductions with businessmen, like do things because they want to help athletes. If you're Ohio State or Michigan, you want to go above the cap. So you're looking for NIL deals that will get approved that can do that. And then if you're in the group of 5 and your school's not paying $20.5 million, you're also trying to get your athletes some extra money so that they can stay competitive and still come or stay at your school. So it's going to be fascinating. The question is like, what happens when these deals get denied, right? Like that's the challenge here. We've also already seen a lawsuit with Wisconsin player Xavier Lucas going to Miami without going to the transfer portal.
Right.
He had signed a revenue share deal and then went to Miami. He unenrolled, enrolled, and has been there all spring. And now you have a lawsuit where Wisconsin sued Miami, not the athlete, for tampering, tortious interference. So there's a lot of other questions about the contracts themselves, whether or not that changes the structure around college sports beyond just the NIL deals themselves. Can you actually go after tampering this way? If you find that someone did this after a deal was signed, I don't think everyone's expecting him to be sent back to Madison, but is there a financial penalty that you now have for tampering? Like, can you create some other regulations around how this works now that you have contracts between the school and the athlete? Like Joshua, if you sign a 2-year deal and you decide, and you're going to get paid $50,000 from the school each year, and after 1 year, Oklahoma decides to try to pluck you. So you go in the portal, whatever. Oklahoma could have to pay a buyout to get you out of that contract, or they might have to fulfill the second year of that contract. That would also create some rules and regulations about this because decisions would have to be made with, the capologists in mind, right? Like everyone would have to do all the math and make sure that it fits to add somebody. Maybe you are going to focus more on talent development of guys that you already have on your roster. Like there's just like a lot of interesting wrinkles to this. about how roster construction could work? Is there
Sure.
going to be more stability because you have a contractual element here?
I think that's intriguing. In this idea of buyouts, we talked about it on the last episode. The one thing that I thought about afterward is, we talk about this movement from a like player wants to go, do they need to pay a buyout in this type of situation? The other thing I think about is when players get processed out, is there a buyout on the other side? Like if you basically tell me to hit the portal, do you have to pay my second year of my contract or whatever the thing is? So I think these are all interesting parts of it.
And we have to see if those are enforceable, right? Like you could add those provisions now, but we have to see if they can get challenged. If they hold up, that's really interesting. Then it's like coaches' contracts.
Sure.
Where yes, there's movement, but you have to make these are very weighty decisions to decide something.
It's like every other contract in the world. The other thing too, and your explainer that is coming out is phenomenal. This is something I had not really thought about, but everybody thinks about every angle from this. If you're an administrator, the recruiting aspect of this in terms of the cap and how you have to basically have all of your funds earmarked. We're used to watching players make it up to signing day, and some guys are still making their decision with the early signing period. You have some guys that make it all the way out to the traditional signing day. Not nearly as much anymore because players like to early enroll. But now with the cap, you have to basically be able to account for every player that you offer committing right on the spot and saying, okay, that money's taken up. So now there's this other element of how do we recruit? Is recruiting going to change to where players can sign on the spot when they get an offer? This is a part of recruiting that I hate, but we got to a point where you basically had to offer a player to even get them to come to camp or to take a visit on campus. And a lot of those offers were non-committable. You can't do it anymore. So now the whole process of how players are going to get offered probably changes, because you need to be able to say, if we offer this player, that money is accounted for and it's not there anymore. And we got to look at the rest of our recruiting board and figure it out from there.
Yeah, I was talking to Pat Chun, the Washington athletic director, about this, and he brought that up, right? Like you can't wait. Someone can't just pick a hat if you don't have that money available to them. Right. You need to know. And so he was hoping that we get to the point of just kind of a rolling signing period where when you offer someone, you are offering them their rev share contract as well, and they can sign it on the spot. Right now, you can offer that with the way that it's written out against year one, but you can't sign it until your signing period for your sport. But why wouldn't you be able to do it on the spot? That would simplify so much. And then you can't get, someone's going to try to poach your guy or swoop in there and try to get you to flip. You can actually just make decisions and then not be bothered by it again, or you're just tampering and there's other things that come into play if you break a contract. But I think that would be a really interesting outcome of all of this. If that, because of the way you have to allocate the money, you have to plan really like 2, 3, 4 years out. And as you're allocating money for recruits, you're also, hey, how much are we earmarking for transfers? Because here's another point I don't think people are thinking about. July 1 is the start of this era. The money we're talking about, $20.5 million for schools that are paying all the way up to the cap. That goes through it starts July 1, goes through June 30th of next year.
Yes.
Do you know how many transfer portal windows are in that period of time? Like you have to figure out, you're guessing right now, right, of how much money you think you're going to need for the portal in all these sports that you're paying money into. But you have to figure all that out now, because you can't pay all $20.5 million right now and have no money available for the portal or recruiting. Right? For next year, you have to think about all of this in advance. That's why so many people have hired folks that have worked under salary caps in pro sports or talked to the pro sports teams in their areas, because this is totally different. Like to your point, Joshua, if somebody all we had talked about before were scholarships, right? Like, hey, do you have a scholarship available? And then in an unregulated NIL world, hey, could you fundraise money, right? For somebody to give a new, kid who wasn't available and now decommitted from somewhere, hey, let's go after him. Do we have money to offer him? Now you've got rules, you've got a cap system. And so you have to make a lot of decisions around that. And I think that's what's really, really interesting here.
And no, it's super intriguing to me. And I'm very curious, like, again, it's this push and pull. And to your point, schools would always, if they had a guy or two who were out there they would either leave the scholarships available or they'd process guys on the back end to make the scholarship
Correct.
come up. How do you navigate that in this new world? It's going to be intriguing. The other thing too is we're talking about this from like a very football centric standpoint, but there are other sports that are going to be involved. You know, you got a rev share with basketball, women's hoops, and other sports if you feel like it's important to your university. What are you hearing about that, number one? And are those numbers like set in stone on a year-to-year basis? Or do you think there's kind of this floating part of the budget where if you need to come up with a little bit more for a football or basketball player, you might take that from gymnastics, you might take that from volleyball?
It's a great question. And my guess is that every school is doing it differently. Or they're just saying, listen, like the football numbers are close enough between all of these schools, between your rivals, like, or all the schools in your own league. If you're in the $12 to $15 million range for rev share, close enough, right? Like it's possible that that is one of the approaches, but I think it's really hard. There's schools that are like, I'll use Oklahoma as an example. They've got a dynasty in softball. They're really good at gymnastics. They win national championships. Those are part of the rev share dollars. They're getting rev share. So is baseball. It's SEC baseball. That's a huge, huge sport. So you've got to, some of these schools are deciding we've got to do more than just scholarships or, you know, helping people do NIL deals. We need to actually give them a piece of the pie. And it's going to be really interesting to see how schools divvy it up. I think there is a pressure to keep the men's basketball dollars in the same area. This is actually why people are talking about the Big East maybe having an advantage here because they don't have football. So even if they're not spending $20.5 million because they're not bringing in that much money because they don't have football, they might be able to spend more than, let's say, other schools are doing $4 million, 3 or 4 in men's basketball. Maybe they could do 7, right? Maybe that gives them an advantage in some areas. Women's basketball is a fascinating example. Like if you're South Carolina, shouldn't more money go to women's basketball than men's?
You would think their coaches getting paid, their players should too.
Correct. And they're getting money. We just don't know the breakdowns yet. A lot of schools are operating under numbers that are similar to the back pay damages. So we're talking like 75% for football, 10 to 15 for men's basketball, women's basketball gets some, and then, you know, the miscellaneous sports. New scholarships, because roster limits changed. So if you're now sponsoring more scholarships in baseball, that counts against the cap, by the way. That's just like just a sub note there. But you have to figure that out. It's going to come away from somewhere because it's a cap system. So I think that's where, again, like finding true business opportunities or NIL deals that can get approved is going to make up some ground for some of those sports and could still exist for like UVA swimming. Like their swimmers are Olympians and they are super marketable. They can still do stuff that just kind of goes through the NIL clearinghouse, right? Like maybe it doesn't matter as much if they get a rev share. So those are all questions that have to be decided on a school-to-school basis. And here is where another lawsuit is going to come up. Title IX.
Yes.
Title IX. So really, we haven't talked about this at all. We've been talking about the rev share era. We've been talking about even the House settlement. There's already been 2 appeals for Title IX related to the back pay damages because of the calculation that was given for that. So that was, again, the 75%, 15%, 5% for women's basketball, and et cetera. So you have, there were reasons, right, that was calculated based on like TV exposure, media exposure, amount of games on television, the sport you played, position you played. There's a reason for it. So we'll see if those challenges work because there was a lot of thought given to it. But moving forward, I've talked to a couple lawyers. They don't think if you just match that formula, that's a strong legal argument. They said, if you're saying, okay, well, here is what revenue we bring in on our campus, so we're kind of trying to be proportional to that, that might hold up, but that's going to be challenged, right? Because in all of these systems, Joshua, everyone I've talked to, no one's doing 50-50. No one is giving $10 million to female athletes in their athletic department. They're still giving at least the lion's share to football, which is a men's sport. So that is something that could get challenged. And we don't know exactly how they would apply Title IX to this. Like when Title IX was written, it was not to apply to a revenue share era of college sports. It's about participation. It's about access. But do they apply it the way that they do for scholarships, which is that it has to be proportional? If your school is 51% men enrollment and 49% women, That's how your scholarships have to be for sports. Is it going to apply that way? Or, is it, okay, well, 200 of our athletes have deals. 200 need to have deals, even if they're smaller deals. Like we just don't know, but that is going to be a lawsuit like very soon, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the fascinating thing for me, right? Like you talked about the era in which the Title IX laws came about, and like this was certainly not something anybody saw. And then it gets to this back and forth that I keep referring to, where within universities, many of them public institutions, like very different than how you can and would run a private business, and those two
100%.
things are very much at odds when we're talking about this new era of collegiate athletics. And so there's a lot to have to sift through. Like you have to play by certain rules here, but we're also trying to run this thing like a business that doesn't have to play by those rules, and it's complicated.
Right. Yeah. Private business doesn't have to adhere to Title IX, right? Like that. This is because these are universities and they're institutions of higher education that this applies. So we will, like a lot of this, we won't know until a court rules on it, exactly how these things are going to get applied. I will say, I think there's athletic directors out there that would have been happy to do 10 and 10 and split it gender, by gender. But you can't do that if everyone else in your conference is giving
Right.
$15 million to football. You can't fall behind for 3 years while that school gets sued and you're waiting to see if it holds up or not. So that's part of the thing. I think everyone knows someone or someone's are going to get sued over Title IX. But in the meantime, everyone's kind of operating in similar worlds. So we'll see. I will say, you started the show out by saying, what's going to look different? What's going to feel different? I don't think football Saturdays will look or feel that different, except maybe you'll see more commercials with the athletes involved in them, because they could now do, like Jeremiah Smith could do a, hey, come to Ohio State commercial, like when you're coming back for break for an Ohio State game, because he now, like the school has his NIL rights. But I think we're used to athletes being paid. We're used to how that works. We'll see if their total income goes down next year. Like that's something that could change. Maybe we'll see investments in particular Olympic sports. Maybe some schools, well, we've seen a couple schools already cut some of their programs. You will see schools decide we're not nationally competitive in this sport, so we're going to decrease our investment there because you only have so much money. But I think from like a day-to-day thing, you might notice that with your school. I don't know if you notice stuff across the board unless a lot of sports get canceled or, you're not able to sponsor a sport because a lot of schools get rid of it.
Yeah, I know, I'm with you there. Like when we went from the non-NIL world to the NIL world, like certainly you'd hear on the broadcast, they talk about a player who was getting paid a ton of money, but like the games felt like the games typically felt. Like you were just as wrapped up in it. Your emotions felt as strong, probably a little bit stronger, because now you're like, hey man, that quarterback's getting paid. He's got to complete that pass, right? But
right,
like
you got to live up to it.
Felt like football in the fall. The NCAA tournament and basketball, both on the men's and women's side, was like super exciting, and it felt the way that it did. The only way I feel like this thing feels different, honestly, is like we're going to be far enough into this where you might have some people that had lifestyle creep and now they can't pay bills. And like maybe that's a storyline that we talk about during the week, or like you have people who did not talk to the tax man and the IRS is coming after them. And that might be a storyline during the week. But in terms of like the actual game day feel, to me, we're still watching what we've always watched and what we've always loved.
And hopefully maybe some of these rules are enforceable and they can kind of help with rosters, because it'd be awesome if you knew who was on your team every year and you weren't super worried and there weren't bidding wars every single year with players. Right. So we'll see. I will say there is real optimism, I think, from coaches and administrators, because you've been in a kind of a lawless state for 4 years and you're hoping that you can actually have some rules and regulations. Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, said, like, we know this is rough and it's obviously very costly, but they could have gone bankrupt if they took this case, the House case, to court and lost.
Right.
So this is better than the alternative. Schools have choices. College sports has choices. It's going to look different. It's going to feel the same in a lot of areas. It's going to feel different in some. But we'll continue to cover it. But we want to give you guys a primer for the revenue share era of college sports. I hope this helped. I hope this made some sense. And we'll get back to our regular scheduled college football content, specifically on Rushing the Field, when we return next week. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thanks for listening. You can also read a version of this primer on NBCSports.com. We'll see you next week.